Hello and welcome to the Publisher Podcast from Media Voices. I'm Esther Thorpe, and this season Chris Sutcliffe, Peter Houston and I are exploring the people and products powering publishing, both through the podcast and our adjacent weekly newsletter, which you can sign up for at voices.media. A quick reminder, if you're listening to this before the end of November, we're doing a live episode in London on November the 27th, looking back at 2024 and what publishers can expect from next year. This is from a cosy room in a pub. All the details and RSVPs are at voices.media/podinapub. We'd love to see you there. There's festive food and drinks if you can make it. This season of the Publisher Podcast is sponsored by BlueConic, your all-in-one customer data solution. Go from data to insights to action with BlueConic's fully integrated customer data operating system. Learn more at blueconic.com, where data is for doing. And in the episode before this one in the feed, you can hear from Patrick Crane, who is the director of the core sales team at BlueConic. So Patrick explains the current state of the market when it comes to third-party cookies and where it still has a place, as well as how publishers can plan their audience data strategies around industry uncertainty. It's a great briefs episode, it's 20 minutes long, and you can hear Patrick talk about why Google's third-party cookie strategy is like kicking a laundry machine down the stairs. This week we're joined by Will Hayward, journalist, author and columnist, specialising in Welsh politics. He's also the writer of the aptly named Will Hayward Newsletter. Now, Will has actually only recently left Reach plc, where he wrote a newsletter of the same name for Wales Online, and that won Best Politics Newsletter at this year's Publisher Newsletter Awards. Now, since going it alone in September, he's built up more than 3,000 subscribers in just 6 weeks, with subscriber and revenue numbers now exceeding its previous iteration. So we talk about his journey into covering all things Wales, what he learned working at the UK's largest regional publisher, and what opportunities he spotted in going solo, even if it meant having to restart his newsletter from scratch. I started by asking Will what drew him to covering Welsh politics and how he got to where he is now.
Actually, I'm not from Wales, so
You don't sound Welsh.
No. I sometimes put a bit of an accent on when I was a general reporter, just because it made life easier. So I moved to Cardiff in 2008. So when I was 19, and I've never left. My entire journalism career so far has been in Wales. I love it as a patch, and it's where all my expertise are. So I started at Wales Online and the Western Mail as a trainee, and I was there for 8 years and finished off as Welsh Affairs editor. And during that time, I reported on COVID, and I wrote a couple of books about Wales. And then now 7 weeks ago, I left. I took the plunge and I went freelance and started. I had a newsletter through Substack, but that was through Reach plc, and I wasn't able to take that with me. So I just launched another one of the same name, and that's what I've been doing since. So there's that. There's the podcast. I do a regular column for The Guardian. I'm a freelance, but I do a regular column on Welsh politics and Welsh issues. So it's good fun.
It's a curious calling for somebody who's not Welsh to kind of really want to, because I mean Welsh and Welsh and English politics I feel like work quite differently. So is there had to be sort of quite a learning curve in terms of making sure you don't come in with those kind of non-Welsh assumptions, I suppose?
Yeah, I think because I was really interested in politics, so I came to Cardiff University to do politics, and I don't mind saying that to begin with, my entire political worldview and all my knowledge was from a wider British perspective. And I think obviously there has been a learning curve with that, but also it's been quite interesting to, as somebody who's essentially an outsider. I think also with Welsh politics from a devolved point of view, it's only been going since 1999. So the Assembly, is now the Welsh Parliament. The Senedd has got more and more powers over the last 10 years or so, and has become so much more central to people's lives and people's consciousness. So I think if you asked 5 years ago if people knew what the Senedd was, what it did, most people would say no. Now most people say yes. So it's kind of been there's some incredible journalists in Wales, but it's a fairly limited media landscape. So I think you get all the advantages of almost feeling like a local regional reporter, but with the bonus of you're reporting on a nation and a national government, and it has all the money and the issues that a national government has, but with that sense of attachment that you wouldn't get within like a region if you were covering Liverpool or Manchester, for instance.
Yeah, and I think COVID must have been a point where that stood out so starkly that different places did work differently. And I can remember that there were points that people sort of saying to the BBC and the big national organisations, look, you can't, like, you've got to specify this doesn't apply to these regions.
Yeah, absolutely. So I was one of only two people who were in both the UK government and the Welsh government political lobby during that period. And that was my first book, was kind of on that difference and how things were different in Wales. I remember when England had its first kind of opening in May of 2020 after the first kind of big wave of COVID. Boris Johnson said, you can now drive as far as you like. If you want to go to the beach, go to the beach. And a huge part of my job was reporting that Welsh police forces were saying, no, you can't come here. And I think that I called it like an awakening of devolved consciousness. So for the first time, people in Wales could see the actual decisions that were being made in Wales that are affecting their lives. And some people, that was a fantastic thing. And for others, they hated it. But it's kind of a genie which I don't think is going to go back in the bottle. So I think an awareness within Wales, but also outside of Wales, that Wales does have a government. Wales has always been treated just a little bit less of a country than Scotland has, I think, within the Union. And journalistically, it's frustrating, but it's also makes you feel like your reporting is important, because it's one of those things, if you didn't tell these stories, very few people would be. So that's a really exciting thing to do.
Yeah, in part that's how loudly people shout, and I guess media has a big part to play in amplifying that.
Yeah, 100%.
Yeah. So you were at Reach for 8 years. Reach, for the majority of that time, has been advertising driven. That's been its primary revenue stream. I think it was about 18 months ago, it announced it was going to launch a host of Substack newsletters, which a lot of industry eyebrows shot up. Like, how was that going to work with all the wider revenue streams? What do those discussions look like internally?
So I can only really speak for my newsletter, which was, now I didn't choose the name as this, that it was called the Will Hayward Newsletter. Now I didn't choose that name. So originally I went to one of the senior people I know within Reach who ran our newsroom originally before they'd moved up, and said, I'd really like to start my own Substack, because obviously as a journalist within an organisation, your earning potentials, it's not incredible. So I said, well, could I do this? And they said, well, why don't you do it for us within the company, and your salary can increase if that does well. I was like, okay, it's interesting. So I started building up a newsletter, trying to grow it. And that was over a 10-month period, and it did really well. It won the Best Political Newsletter at Publisher Awards. It was really well received, and it had a lot of subscribers and lots of people who were willing to pay. I then thought, actually, this is something I'd quite like to try and do myself. And so I just made that decision. I'm gonna go for it. It was won't pretend it wasn't nerve-wracking. I think the conversations within Reach were, obviously, as you say, Reach is very much in that volume mindset when it comes to journalism, but they do care, and there's people in who really care about having that those stories and that parts of the brand which are really, you can hang your hat on, and this is what we do, this is how we support journalism. And everything I've done in my career up to this point, I've done at Reach. So any awards I've won, that's not been in spite of Reach, that's been because of Reach. So I wouldn't say a bad word against, but it was definitely a change. I think for them, they saw it as it was almost a pilot. I think mine, they had one before, which was on Port Vale Football Club, but mine was the first kind of foray into like paid stuff. And I think Wales was seen as a perfect way of doing it, because I had quite a lot of brand recognition personally within Wales. I don't know if they'll name another newsletter after an individual person. I think maybe that's something I can't speak for them, they can speak for themselves, but they probably wish they hadn't done, because when I leave, you can't have someone else write that newsletter. So they've repackaged it. It's now called The Journal, but it's not a paid for newsletter. But I mean, it was good for me, but I think also that it grew because I had built a personal brand within Wales as well. So it was an experiment for them. And I think they've learned the hard way that if you go hard into that, I need Facebook referrers or Google referrers, you are the subject to the whims and an algorithm of something you don't control, and trying to get people to come straight to your product is something they would really like to get into, and that was a way they thought of doing it. So you'd need to ask them about what their plans are going forward with it, but I think that was the initial thinking. Yeah.
When you were driving sign-ups to that at Reach, I know there's a problem where they couldn't get the Substack sign-up page to integrate with the main Reach newsletters page. So was a lot of the drive to that done from you?
Yeah.
Or were there sort of like call to actions in articles and stuff that you managed to get in?
I think that the majority, because you can see all those stats in Substack, I think the vast majority of referrals came from me. So from my Twitter before, I had to do you got to be a bit sneaky with when you're using Twitter to get to Substack, because if you put a Substack link, Twitter massively downgrades it. But what I found was if I did one tweet explaining what the Substack was with a link to it, and then when you quote tweet that, it tended not to see it as Substack. So that, or I'd pin that tweet and I'd do a thing on the Substack, but I'd say all the details are in my pinned tweet, and that was how referrers came. The rest came from putting links to it within our articles. So if we did a piece of journalism which was compatible with the newsletter, it'd be like, if you want more details about this, you can see here. Sometimes we put old newsletters on as stories if they were evergreen content, and so that also drove referrals as well. But it was kind of I would say most of it did come from my promotion, but if you're going to do a newsletter after someone's name, that probably is inevitable.
Yeah. It's quite interesting that a lot of publishers, when there was this initial Substack wave back in sort of 2018, 2019, a lot of publishers were kind of like, well, we're a bit nervous about our journalists leaving and doing this. So there were a few that did launch, or did put their journalists a bit more front and centre. I guess I'd love to know your thoughts on that, given that you maybe kind of became that fulfilling prophecy for people who might be worried about that. Like, is that a fair concern for people to have, or are you maybe the exception rather than the rule?
I don't know. I think my experience of now going off and doing it myself. So I've started a new company in which to house that newsletter just to protect me legally. I've had to get insurance to cover myself on this. So for professional indemnity insurance, there's the little things like sorting out sponsorship and all that administrative side is so much work beyond just me getting stories and writing them. So I think some people could follow and do similar thing what I'm doing, and some people have done it before. I'm by no means the first one to do it. But it would take probably a particular kind of personality to. My life would have been a lot easier if I hadn't done this. But I'm very glad I have, and that's nothing against Reach. It's just I think I was ready, but I was also in quite a good position because I don't have kids. I didn't have a lot of dependents, so it's quite easy for me to take that risk. But it's tricky for Reach because actually, if you have individual personalities who readers like, it actually is really good for not just building revenue but building trust and drive traffic because they're coming to a particular person. But obviously, you're then putting a lot of your brand within individuals, which is obviously inherently risky. But that's what TV's done since time immemorial, isn't it? So I don't think it's probably a new concept.
No, true. So you're 7 weeks into this. You've just done a LinkedIn post that has said that your revenues have now exceeded that of what you did as the Will Hayward Newsletter under Reach. Mm-hmm. Firstly, did you expect it? And secondly, why you think that's happened now as opposed to when it was sort of under a bigger brand?
Well, I suppose the first thing to say is this is what I do. I do a column for The Guardian, but by the overwhelming majority of what I do day to day is journalism through this newsletter, and then I have a podcast and other social media channels, but obviously, ultimately, it's all driving people towards this newsletter. So I think that's a big part of the reason is just more time is dedicated to it. I was still expected to deliver everything I was delivering before when I was a reporter. So the newsletter was like an additional thing I did. And it was in a way easier to write because the work I was doing day to day at Reach could complement the newsletter. I think another part of it is the tendency for people to support something which is independent. When it was, I'm saying, can you give money to Reach to help fund this? People do feel a bit less ownership of it. It did well. I think it was one of the most successful of their paid newsletters. But I think now when it's me saying, look, this is what I do. If you fund me, I can do this. If you don't, I can't. People are feeling like they've got that kind of ownership of it has been really, really valuable. Like I created several different, there's obviously free subscriptions, but then there's a monthly subscription, there's a yearly subscription. There's also a thing called founding membership. And what has been surprising, so with that, I said that people can pay what they want above the going rate. And some people have been incredibly generous with their donations, just general members of the public who have valued what I've done previously or are valuing what I'm doing now, which has been really, really moving and quite taken me aback. But the other thing is I've got sponsorship on this. So Welsh company has offered to sponsor it. Don't know how long that will go for, but obviously then you can find other sponsors. But getting paid per newsletter is a massive, massive bonus. So it just means that because this has been all I've been focusing on, it's been that's why I think it's probably in the space of a month there was the same growth as there was in 10 months. So it's been very exciting. I also Reach did quite large discounts on my previous newsletter. So it was like 40 quid for a year, but they offered in like January of last year, like you could have a year for 10 quid to boost the amount of paid subscribers and try and get people in. And I haven't done that because I think 50 quid for a year for what it's offering is actually really good value. So I haven't discounted it. I might offer discounts if people want to gift additional subscriptions. So if they want to refer people, I might offer discounts on that. But I'm trying not to massively devalue the thing I'm offering, because I think that's one of the issues journalism has had, that we've devalued our product to the point that it's quite hard to get people to pay for it. So I just don't really want to keep that going.
So I think you're now at 3,000, I think just over 3,000. Is it more than 3,000 subscribers? 3,000 subscribers?
3,300, I think.
When you set out and took this plunge in September, did you have an idea that you kind of get to that and maybe you get, I don't know, like 10% of paying subscriptions? Or was it very much like, let's just see how it goes?
So what I did, in my head, I kind of had two deadlines. The first was I said, I'm going to go all in on this until the end of May 2026, because that's after the next Senedd election. So the Welsh parliamentary elections. And that's when I think there'll be a high watermark for interest in this. I mean, we could see Labour not be the largest party in Wales for the first time since 1922. I'm not saying that's likely, but it's kind of possible for the first time. I think there'll be a lot of interest in it. So my thinking was, if I can't make it work now, it isn't going to work. But I also, over the last year or so, I'd saved up enough, which essentially I knew that I could go for 6 months without earning. So the kind of mentality has been just everything I do has got to be towards growing it for 6 months, and then I'll see where I'm at. So I'll see where I'm at in 6 months, and then I'll see where I'm at in 18 months. And it was one of those things that, the worst case scenario, I think I'd probably get another job in journalism somewhere. So it was just, I didn't want to kind of wonder if it would have worked. It felt like there was a unique opportunity there to do it. So I thought, sod it, why not?
Yeah. It's a model, I mean, apart from the personal branding, it's a model not dissimilar to that Mill Media quite famously has taken from city to city in the UK. Did you take inspiration from people like that?
I wouldn't say I took inspiration from them. It's always nice to know that someone else is doing similar stuff. I think you had to treat Wales as its own thing. I think Wales is different to, you can't treat it as a city. Even the stuff that people are starting up covering London through it, I think Wales is different because it's so underserved. We've got 3 or 4 main specific news platforms that focus on Wales, but there's a lot. For a country of over 3 million, that's pretty small. So in answer to your question, yeah, it was comforting probably to see that other people were doing something similar, but I wouldn't say that I looked at what they were doing and thought, yeah, I want to do that. I kind of looked what I had and what I thought I could offer, and felt like there was a market there for it.
Do you think it's something that other journalists should consider doing if they have the following?
It's such a personal thing, because I loved working at Wales Online. There's elements of, I'm really sad I don't do that anymore. I don't work in that environment, but I don't think it's something that people should try and do straight out of journalism school. I think having a personal following is massive. I think that's very helpful. But I also think I learned so much from the journalists I sat next to and the editors I had brilliant editors at Wales Online, like people who really got it, who were, every piece of work they touched, they made better. And working with people like that and kind of getting stuff through osmosis through them, I think is what kind of gave me the confidence to do this. So I wouldn't suggest that anyone just takes the plunge themselves, because if they haven't got experience doing it. But I think if you think it can work, you can back yourself, because what you also don't need, you don't need millions of people to read it for it to be quite profitable. You just need to know what you need to earn and have a target for it and work out what your contingency plans if you don't hit it. This is at the point now where it pays me enough to live. Doesn't pay me enough to live well. But
it is journalism.
Yeah, it is journalism, and it is less than 2 months. So hopefully in the spring, I'm talking about how, yeah, this is at a really good point and I'm able to, because there's other stuff I'd like to launch from it. I've got other ideas I'd like to do, and Substack's actually quite good for enabling you to do other things. Things like, not necessarily through Substack, but like things like live events and stuff like that, which I think there is a market for. I got another book which I've just signed for as well, covering Wales, and I think a lot of these things can link together. So yeah, if you want to do it, I'd say go for it, but it's hard.
You said already your newsletter in June did beat competition from really major publications like The Economist and Bloomberg. It took the best politics newsletter title. That was a packed category. Firstly, how did that feel? And secondly, are there things you've taken from the time you were doing that newsletter at Reach and that you've taken into launching your own personal one?
Yeah, I mean, that was a stacked field. Sometimes I kind of almost judge the judges for picking me in a way. I think one of the advantages of covering Wales is because the level of base knowledge from a lot of people on the area I'm covering is quite low. There's quite a lot of low-hanging fruit journalistically in Wales, which you can provide really, really incredible insights on something that people think they know about, but they don't, just because there's not a lot of coverage of it. Whereas, if you're covering UK politics or American politics, on the same day you write your piece, there's going to be dozens and dozens of other pieces which are going to be people who've got equally good contact bases, equally good insights. Whereas with Wales, it's more limited. So I think that was probably quite beneficial. And also Wales has, as I say, it's got its own government. There's money here, there's controversies here, there's bad governance, which is on quite a good scale. So there's a lot of, as I say, there's a lot of low hanging fruit. So I think that was probably advantageous for me in terms of that.
So when you were looking to set this up, and I suppose as you've gone on, what does a newsletter, things like you mentioned the podcast as well, what does that look like in terms of sort of frequency? You said you didn't want to do discounts, but when you were sitting down writing out like how this is going to look, how did you decide on things like how often you're going to publish, what the cost is going to be, and what do people expect for that subscription? I
was really clear when I started it that you will get a minimum of one a week, but it will be more than that over the course of a year. It's going to average out and more. I'd like to move to 2 a week, one which is a kind of a more timely look at what is happening in Wales this week, and then another which is more of a deep dive. I can justify that more economically when I can get the sponsorship to go to 2 a week. I think hopefully I will be at that point at some point quite soon. I've had some discussions about that because ultimately if I move to 2 newsletters a week, I double my work, but I don't increase my return unless I have a sponsor who pays per newsletter. And my sponsor at the moment is fantastic. They're doing it because they value what I'm doing, and that's really nice. I think with the podcast, I'm doing it with 2 really, really talented comedians who've got quite a lot of name recognition themselves. So we do that once a week and then sporadic kind of that emergency pod as it's needed. And we've just secured sponsorship on that as well, which is massive, and are planning some live shows, which is really exciting. I think you've got to under promise and over deliver. So what I've tried to say is this is what you're going to get as a minimum. I think the average length of my newsletters is almost 3,000 words. And of that, I'm putting probably half above a paywall. So you're getting a lot, and as a free subscriber. And part of my rationale for that is I want people who have subscribed for free to still have a reason to click on it when that email drops. But also because Wales has a very, very small, hyper-engaged people who are very hyper-engaged with Welsh politics, and then it has a huge, huge, huge majority of people in Wales who are not engaged at all. And what I don't want to do is, I think it's really important that people in Wales become more engaged with the country in which they live, and I think that'd make a massive difference towards better governance here. And I think if I stick everything behind a paywall, that makes it hard for them to engage. So I don't write the above and below the paywall differently in terms of style, but I prioritize content which I think will be more accessible to people above the paywall, because as I say, I'm kind of trying to build this long term, and I think if I can get them to come to it because it's of value, that will lead to conversions more than just trying to say put everything below that paywall straight away. So I kind of came to the conclusion that I'm in it for the long haul, and there's a huge untapped market of people who are not engaged with Welsh politics who really need to be for their own benefit. So that's been the kind of mentality I've had. So fast forward to May 2026, what will a successful almost 2 years by then look like for you? We'll be doing another podcast from a golden palace, which I've just built in the valleys of my newsletter funding. No, I think in terms of subscribers, I'd really like to be at 20,000 non-payer, 20,000 total subscribers, which I don't think is actually unreasonable. In terms of paying subscribers, I think it depends on what I'm charging. What I would like to be able to do is bring on a couple more people, possibly from other areas of Wales as well, to contribute to the newsletter in terms of longer form investigations that we can work on together. Because the issue for me since I've started has never been what am I going to write about, what could I possibly write about. It's the choice between lots of competing stories. I think also, and it's been the bit that's taken the longest for me to get my head around, is increasing those commercial links and making it easier to get investment into it in terms of sponsorship, whether that be sponsoring individual newsletters on particular issues and stuff like that. And obviously there's ethical considerations. Like I've had offers to sponsor this newsletter, which I've turned down because I don't think I can be sponsored by a certain group or organisation, just ethically. But I think it's a much greater subscriber base, and I think with regards to the newsletter, it would be a newsletter and podcast which sets the agenda going into 2026. Something that every politician wants to go on, not just because they want to, but because it's an imperative, because it helps set the agenda. So that would be what I would aim to do.
It's a final curious question I've got, because you said about bringing other people on. Have you got any kind of, not regrets or concerns, but is there anything around there about the fact that you have tied it so closely to you as a personal brand, as opposed to, say, launching the Welsh politics newsletter, that you could maybe bring other people in and one day sort of step back from a bit like that? That is so anchored to you.
Yeah, I mean, if I say I'd been starting from scratch, I would not have called it the Will Hayward Newsletter. But because the previous one was called the Will Hayward Newsletter, and I wanted that subscriber base to come across with me, that's why I had to do it. Hopefully you just change it to like WH News or something.
Welsh House.
Where you could have Wales something beginning with H, couldn't you? You could make that work. So I've always been quite uncomfortable with how much I've tied it to me. But I think you've kind of just got to accept it. And I think actually at a time when there's a lot of misinformation and there's everyone with a phone can pretend to be a journalist, even though they've got none of the skills of actually objectively assessing information and making ethical journalistic decisions. I think a lot of trust can come from building a personal brand. And whenever I do stories, I always try and show my working, and I always try and say what I don't know as well as what I do know. So I think it is a good way of combating. If you just have a faceless Wales News Service, or actually Wales News Service is actually an organisation. If you have Wales News 24 or something at the top of the screen and no one knows who that is, I think it's harder to get people to trust it potentially now that anyone can just set up a website and do it. So I think it's been probably something I had to do, really. So we'll see. Maybe I will regret it when actually I just want someone else to do the work.
Well, that's you can think past May 26th for that.
Yeah.
Would you consider yourself a creator, or would you say the journalistic principles that you apply sort of set you apart from that a little bit?
Creator of journalism, maybe, but I find the idea of a content creator a little bit nauseating. It's nothing against it's not an easy job being a content creator. It's really hard work. I know people who do it, but I think it's just I'm a journalist. That's my trade. That's my profession. That's my skill set. Yeah, I'm a journalist who creates journalism.
Thanks so much to Will Hayward for speaking to us. Now, don't forget, we've got a write-up of the key learnings from this interview on voices.media, or dropped into your inbox every Tuesday if you sign up to the publisher newsletter, also on voices.media. This season is sponsored by BlueConic, the operating system that puts data into action for marketing and growth doers. Their industry-first solution empowers doers with an unmatched range of capabilities to access relevant customer data, create resonant customer experiences, and drive maximum returns for their business. Learn more at blueconic.com, where data is for doing. We'll be back next week with the final episode of the season with Dow Jones, although we will be releasing our recording of the pod in the pub the week after that as a bonus. If you'd like to join us live for that on November the 27th in London, just RSVP at voices.media/podinapub. Until then, you can keep up with all things Media Voices by following us on LinkedIn and subscribing to the publisher newsletter over on voices.media. Until next week.